Good morning, everyone. My name is Leandro Casa. My groupmate is Lynn Tran, and we are presenting the characteristics of a bank CEO. Here is the table of contents of what we will be looking into in our presentation. We will be first looking into an industry summary, and then look into what a CEO is, and then the data overview, analysis, and then some key takeaways from our presentation. Now, here is the industry summary for the banking industry. In 2021, there were 4,237 FDIC-insured banks, 72,444 bank branches, $23 trillion in combined assets for all these banks, and $19 trillion in total deposits. The number of FDIC banks has been decreasing over time, as seen in the graph on the upper right. In 2012, there were 6,000 of them, and now there are only 4.2 thousand. And yeah, as you can see in the past 10 years, there's been a decrease in the number of banks by 30% and a 15% decline in the number of branch offices. We also wanted to see the number of failed banks over the years. This data comes from the FDIC website and shows that most banks collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis. And throughout the years, there's been a slight number of bank failures, but not as much as during that time period. And most failed banks during this time were either small or medium-sized banks that were subsequently either acquired, bought out, or just failed on their own. And more banks began to consolidate and became larger and larger in terms of assets. Now, CEOs are very important for banks and for all companies. This quote, which comes from the paper CEO Overconfidence, which was published in the Journal of Financial Economics, is a pretty good summary for what we think the importance of a bank CEO is. Bank CEOs are the primary influence in banking and investment decisions because they are at the very top of the management structure within any bank. And so their importance is greatly outsized when compared to especially all the other management within a bank. Bank CEOs can also serve as chairman of the board. This means that they're not only the head of the management structure, they're also at the head of the oversight structure within a company. Now, there are multiple pros and cons to why a company wants or a bank wants to combine the roles of CEO and chairman of the board, also called dual CEOs. On the pros side, having the CEO and the chairman be the same person creates faster decision making and unifies the leadership within the company. This just means that when there's a crisis, a company can react very quickly, and if there's any new information systems or new investment opportunities, a CEO or that person can make decisions that can improve the company's bottom line very quickly. Now, on the cons side, it is also very detrimental if you want to talk about corporate governance, because the chairman is supposed to be overlooking what the CEO is doing and also just making sure that there's no abuse. If the CEO is also the chairman, then who's going to be watching over whatever the decisions the CEO is doing? Also, if a CEO does poorly, who's going to decide if he does poorly? Who sets the standards? So it's very difficult to replace a CEO who's also the chairman. But we also wanted to do an overview of the data and where we got our data. Our data was obtained from the 10Ks and proxy statements that banks and bank holding corporations file with the SEC. The range of data we extracted includes CEO age and the biography, where they worked at historically and their progress, the CEO gender, CEO tenure, and the CEO duality, which just means if they were the chairman of the board for that year. Our period of interest is from a period that starts with 2004 and ends in 2021, and our data is collected within these two dates. Within this period, there were a total of 938 total banks and 1,511 unique CEOs. In 2004, there were 640 banks. However, in 2021, there were only 346 banks left that filed with the SEC. This is because there were more banks that stopped filing with the SEC than started filing with the SEC during this period. 596 banks stopped filing during this period, and 298 banks started filing. And this can be seen in the graph on the upper right. You can see that the total number has been decreasing ever since, and with the exception of one period in 2019, more companies have stopped filing with the SEC than started filing. The first thing we wanted to look at was the gender composition of banking CEOs. As you can see, the total number of CEOs has been decreasing over time. However, the proportions has stayed consistent. In 2004, 97.2% of banking CEOs were male. In 2021, 97.1% were male. A change of 0.1% in a span of 20 years, and has fluctuated up and down a bit, but not by much. The female percentage has stayed within the band of 3 and around 4% throughout this time period. The next characteristic we wanted to look at was average age. As you can see on the graph on the left, from 2004 to 2021, the average age of CEOs has increased from 56.2 to 60.6 years of age. One thing that's correlated with age is experience within the banking industry, and this suggests that experience is becoming more and more valued over time within the industry. Another data point related to experience is CEO tenure. As you can see on the graph below, CEO tenure has also increased from 2004 to 2021. It went from 7.7 years average tenure for CEOs to 10 years in the span of within 20 years. This is also highly suggestive that experience is becoming more important within the banking industry. And with the exception of a few dips in CEO tenure around 2008, 2009, 2010, and around 2018 and 2019, it has gradually increased in trend. Another curious fact we wanted to look at was what proportion of CEOs were dual CEOs and chairmen. In 2004, nearly half, or 43.9% of CEOs were also chairmen. However, this has decreased quite substantially to around only 36.5% in 2021. Now, CEOs being chairman of the board is important for the reasons we discussed earlier. But we also wanted to see if this affects the tenure and average age of the CEOs if you filter out CEOs that are chairman and those who are not chairman. We will first take a look at average age of CEOs when we separate them into two groups. One group which is CEO only, and another group which is both CEO and chairman. As you can see in the graph, both groups are increasing in age over time within the period. However, CEOs only group is a lot younger than the group that are both chairman and CEO. In 2004, the average age of the CEO only group was 54.4, but it is 58.5 in the dual CEO group. In 2021, the gap is at around the same, with 59.4 being the average age for a CEO only and 62.8 for those that are dual CEOs. This could suggest a few things. For one, dual CEOs could just be staying longer within their positions, which means they are older on average than the other CEO. Another reason is that dual CEOs are more often than not, when compared to CEO only, the founders of their corporations, which means that they have longer tenures and thus are older. The average tenure for CEO only versus dual CEOs has also been divergent. As you can see below, it is 6.1 years average tenure for CEO only compared to 9.8 for dual CEOs. And in 2021, it's 8.4 years compared to 12.8 years. And as can be seen on the trend lines below, the average tenure for CEO only has been increasing at a slower pace than the average tenure for dual CEOs. This is suggestive of the power the dual CEOs have within the company, that they're able to stay longer than when compared to CEO-only group. On the subject of education, we also look at the within the sample of 1,511 CEOs and the level of advanced degrees/licenses they have received. We define advanced degrees as shown below as either a CPA or JD, or an MBA or other master's degree and above. As can be seen, most of the CEOs did not list any advanced degrees, and it was not mentioned within their bio. However, for those that listed them, it is 11% of them that have MBAs, around 6% have CPAs, and around 1% that have a JD or other master's degree. And a breakdown on the total number can be seen on the left. Now looking at this breakdown throughout the years, you can see that over the years, a greater percentage of CEOs shows an advanced degree within their bios. It's only at 12.97% in 2004, but in 2021, it went up to almost a third. These can be seen on the dark lines on the timelines of the number of CEOs. While the overall number of CEOs that listed them has not really been increasing that much, it went from around 90 to within like 100 to 150. The proportion of CEOs has been decreasing over time, which means that the percentage has increased. This is indicative of many things. It could be that there is an overall increase in CEOs with advanced degrees, or these are CEOs with advanced degrees are being showcased more, and they're putting these advanced degrees within their bios. Either way, it's indicative that experience is becoming more relevant within the industry. Now we will look at specific cases of holding companies of failed banks that were listed in the FDIC. These 16 are the ones we found of failed banks in bank holding companies. Looking at the failed banks in a timeline, you can see that most of the banks failed around the 2009 financial crisis, with 7 of the banks failing in 2009 alone. 10 of the failed banks have dual CEOs, while only 5 have separate CEOs and chairmen. Despite most banks being CEO-only companies, most of the failed banks are actually dual CEOs, which could be indicative of more of the con side of what was discussed previously. Now for some key takeaways from our presentation. The number of banks has been decreasing over time, and the ratio of male and female CEOs has remained steady over time. This is one of the obvious general trends within our data. Also, CEOs are becoming older, their tenures are longer, and it can be shown that there's a growing demand for CEOs with advanced degrees, those with CPAs, MBAs, masters, Juris Doctors, and other degrees. All of these mean that banking companies are now more discerning on CEO experience. And on the duality of CEOs and chairmen, dual CEOs have much longer tenures, much older, and the difference is much more pronounced than was described previously. Thank you. Thank you so much. And that should be it for our presentation.